If you find yourself with a camera in your hand and want to learn how to use it, please subscribe to this channel, like the videos, comment below. Hey Potas fam, today we're talking more about our framework that we have provided for you in the description of a couple of our videos about contrast. So what about contrast? When we design our photograph and we look at the scene with our eye, and then we have enough information that we kind of rough in our ISO, our shutter speed, our aperture, and then the composition of how we want to lay it out. When we lift the camera to our eye, we see that same scene with a new perspective because the camera lens and the view that we have through the camera's equipment hardware is a completely different thought process, isn't it? It frames it for us. And so through the framing, we need to use that available view through the camera, because that's what the photo will end up being, is through the view or the framing of the camera. Contrast wise, before we get ahead of ourselves with focus and the final styling design, let's get into the thought of the contrast and how we set that and provide the view to our viewers of our photograph. So this is an image my wife took on one of her vacations before we got married. But the emotion that's experienced through this reminds you of a vacation, probably, at least a vacation you might want to take. So while she was on vacation, she liked this shot and she took this picture. And notice how she framed it. She allowed the hammock cross section to frame the lower half of her photograph. So you don't really look a whole lot down here. This is more kind of intuitive, what your peripheral vision looks at over here. But you probably look something more along this leading line and that leading line with all of these hammock strings, supports going up to that point of the hammock, which, interestingly enough, coincides with the sky and the tree. You just kind of get a feeling of wind and breeze, relaxation, air, right? That's the overall composition, design, layout of a photograph, but the exposure of contrast, how deep the shadows are, how bright the wood is and the ropes of the hammock, contrasted with a deep blue sky and the shadow of the underside of the tree leaves. That's the exposure contrast that we're talking about in our framework, PDF or Excel spreadsheet. Is we have the contrast of the sunlit sky, the nearly overly exposed roads. They're not really overexposed, but they're very close because it's very bright over here and very shaded on that side. Contrast is pretty high in this photograph. Now it may have been added after it was shot, but the camera, I believe she shot this on one of the automatic modes of the camera, is just natural, what the camera itself will set. So you have the shaded tree leaves, you have the darker sky, but then you have the shadowed side of your hammock and you have the lit side of your hammock, and that creates contrast of looking between the highlights and the shadows. The important part of setting your ISO or ISO setting is how deep do you want those shadows to be? How exposed do you want the highlights to be? Do you want to draw those extremes together so that it's not quite as deep a shadow, it's not as much a highlight? If that's true, then going higher in the number for your ISO from 100 to 160 or 200, 320, the numbers are getting higher, but it's also narrowing your contrast. So things are going to look more gray. Even the highlights are going to be pushed a little bit darker. The shadows are going to be pulled a little brighter. Largely, not the only, but that's the primary setting your cameras are going to use, which is going to cause your photos to look muddy because there's less contrast. I'm not saying the more contrast, the less muddy they will be necessarily, because there are other things that can cause a muddy setting or a muddy photograph. But as long as you have a wide enough range for contrast, then your shutter speed is going to be the important second, what we call the fitting to that exposure. So it fits the exposure to the contrast properly. Then you'll be able to make your shutter speed faster or slower so that your overall photograph looks to be properly exposed, because your shutter is not open enough to wash out the bright side of the ropes, but it's not open so long that the dark side is too bright, and that the whole rope looks properly exposed or bright enough so it doesn't look muddy or dark or too contrasted, because it's able to receive the light. The sensor is able to receive the light and express what you're seeing closer to what you originally saw, and deliver the emotion, the feel, and the look that you see to your viewer. Thank you so much for watching. Give us a thumbs up so that other people can watch. Comment down below as to what this has helped you understand about ISO and setting the contrast for your photograph. And if you're not yet part of our family of subscribers, we would love to add you to our family. Just click the subscribe button below and turn the notification bell on. Thank you so much. God bless.